Alright, so welcome back to the channel, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. Before we get started on this next interview, I just wanted to tell you all a little bit about the person who I am interviewing. For those who are watching this and don't know who Lee Parks is, I thought I'd just give you a brief rundown before we get into the on-camera interview. So, not only is Lee my boss, owner, CEO, president of Total Control motorcycle training programs, he is my mentor as a professional motorcyclist. What this guy doesn't know about motorcycles probably isn't worth knowing. He's an internationally renowned motorcycle professional. He's been available for consulting, expert witness testimony. His involvement in the motorcycle industry goes beyond being just a safety program manager. He develops the curriculum for the training programs. He's a vehicle and motorcycle and product tester. He's an instructor trainer. He's a motorcycle racer. He's a PPE manufacturer. He has his own company which manufactures very high quality motorcycle safety gear. He has personally authored over 300 articles. He's taken more than 2,000 photographs for various motorcycle magazines and articles, which have both been published in consumer and trade magazines and different websites. He's also a 3 times best-selling author, and he's been an expert commentator on Open Road Radio and also on CNN. His curriculum vitae, or CV, is very, very long, and I could go on and on and on, probably for another 5 minutes, talking about all the things that he's done and currently doing. But let's get on with the interview, and I would like to introduce you to the very awesome Mr. Lee Parks.
Alrighty, so we're back with the legendary Lee Parks. Legendary Lee Parks. Have you been?
I've never been. You are first.
Legendary Lee Parks, and you really are a legend.
I'll have to try that one out.
So, 10 questions for a motorcycle instructor. Now, I have interviewed a bunch of other motorcycle instructors, and I've asked them the same 10 questions. This is a little bit different for you because you're the man who created the course that makes us motorcycle instructors. So I've had to modify a little bit of these questions for you because you're a special case.
All right.
But thank you for being on camera. Thank you for agreeing to answer these questions. Question number 1. Why did you want to become a motorcycle safety instructor? This was obviously going to take you back to why did you want to create a program?
So I kind of felt like there's a difference. You could say there's 2 ways to be motivated to do something. The first way, which is the way most people are motivated to do things, including me in certain situations,
right.
And that is you can feel driven to do it, right? Like I'm gonna go do this. I want to do this. This is something that I want to do. It's a drive that comes from within outward.
Yeah.
But the other way to be motivated to do something is to be called, kind of like the sirens in the Odyssey.
Yeah.
The
burning bush,
yes.
The heavens open, the voice in the back of your head, something happens that you're
right.
calling.
So I didn't really feel driven to be a motorcycle instructor, but I was the editor for Motorcycle Consumer News at the time.
Okay.
Which sadly, after 50 years, just went out of business, but such is the world of the post-internet world.
Right.
Print
magazine.
Yeah. Print magazines are just disappearing.
Yeah.
So I would get a lot of questions from our readers, like, hey, look, I took the beginner course, or I took an experience course. I took it 3, 4, 5 times. I want to get better, but I don't want to go racing. What else is there that I can do? And nothing existed at the time. There was beginner training, there was racetrack training, and there was motor cop training, and there really wasn't anything other than, various forms of racing. There really wasn't anything.
How old is the MSF course? Do you know?
Well, the MSF has been around in various forms since the early 70s.
Okay.
So
to get your license, that was always available?
No. To get your license,
it was DMV?
You'd go to the DMV and you take a test.
Right.
I already had my license, which I went to the DMV and took the test before I took an MSF course, which was back in 1986. And I just took it because my parents said, hey, we'll get cheaper rates on your insurance if you take the safety course. So I'm like, okay, I'll take a safety course.
Right.
So I didn't use it to get my license. I just did it as a, and hopefully you learn a thing or two,
Right.
So, but this was this would have been in 1999, and I had, so many readers just saying, hey, look, what else can I do? I want to get better. And after hearing enough people complain, I'm like, well, if no one else is going to do it, why not be me? I'll bite.
You stepped up.
Yeah. And but I felt like I was kind of called by our readers that just how come no one's doing anything like this? Right. And I was like, that's a good question. I don't know why no one's doing that. And also being an entrepreneur at heart, I figured, well, no one else is going to do it.
Maybe I can make a few dollars doing it.
That's right.
You gotta eat, right?
Yeah. So now I was a full-time magazine editor, so I didn't really need it to eat or to, or because I had, I was already working 80 hours a week. I didn't need another extra job, but I just felt so many people needed this and nobody was doing it. And I was fortunate enough that I worked with some of the best people in the business in motorcycle safety. They either wrote for me or we did stories on them. Keith Code, Freddie Spencer, David Huff. I mean, we had like the who's who of safety advocates, writing for us. And so I'd had lots of deep dive conversations with all those guys, and everybody had really good points to make, but I didn't think anyone had fully kind of cracked the code of, here's sort of a scientific, methodical approach to riding that anybody could follow and get the same results.
Right.
They all had their little specialties here and there, and so I developed what was originally called the Lee Parks Advanced Riding Clinic.
This is again late 90s?
This is late 90s, 99.
Okay.
And then in 2000 and either one, I think it was 2001, maybe two, somewhere in there, a friend of mine that was the acquisitions editor at the time for Motor Books International, which is the world's largest publisher of automotive and motorcycle books, transportation books. He had called me up and said, hey, I've been reading great things about your courses that you teach. We'd really like you to do a book about what you teach. And that became the book Total Control, which came out in 2003.
Great book.
It came out as a second edition in 2014, like 80% new. So that's the copy to get if you haven't seen that yet or read that yet. And
I will add a link in the description
there you go.
to your book.
Very good. So really it turned into, when I set up the course, I knew the problem was that in order for this to really get out in a big way, I had to take advantage of existing infrastructure. So they had all these MSF, licensing ranges around the country. So I built our advanced course to fit within the confines of the beginner training ranges, and which really wasn't all that different from how I had taught myself to drag my knee when I was in college and I'd started road racing, because there were no real racing schools. I mean, there was a couple, but nothing that I had access to at the time. And so just using a very similar methodology that was based really on the experience I had in martial arts training, because for a long time they figured out how to teach people how to do physical things, and it turns out they learned a thing or two. So just using that as a basic structure, and doing as much research as I could. As I was writing the book, I'd been out of racing for a long time, because when I was the editor for Motorcycle Consumer News and we were a non-advertising supported consumerism magazine, I couldn't really be taking money from sponsors at the same time if I'm supposed to be objective and so forth. So now that had gone, and I had moved on to doing basically website magazines, same idea, but no longer not having to be advertising supported. Or now being advertising supported, I didn't have those conflicts of interest anymore. So I got back involved and I raced in the Wira National Endurance Series as kind of a final test of all the techniques I had put together for the book. And as a rookie team, we ended up winning the national championship in the lightweight class. So that was an amazing accomplishment, which also made for a good thing on the book jacket cover.
Absolutely.
To be able to be a national champion doesn't hurt.
Doesn't hurt.
So anyway, so that's how it kind of got started.
Were you ever tempted to be an MSF instructor back in the day?
Never tempted to be an MSF instructor, just because
you were already so busy doing other things.
Well, no, it just I don't know that I have the patience to just do beginner training all the time. I do it occasionally, and I develop the curriculum for it and so forth. But as a regular job, other people are better suited for that than me. And there's a lot of good people, yourself included, who do that every weekend, and that's wonderful. So I just didn't think that was the best use of my talents. There were other things I could be doing that I was more uniquely qualified to do versus all the great people that we've got doing beginner training back then as well as now.
So that kind of answered my question, which was how did you develop your instructor training? You kind of put that into a nutshell back then in the sense of...
Well, instructor training is different from student training.
Right.
So the student training is you just see what works and develop a curriculum around that, which was, thousands of students. It's easy to,
So if we fast forward a little bit to you developing the total control basic rider training, how did you develop the instructor training or for that to be...
Well, that's too far forward. You want to go back to developing the instructor training for our advanced courses.
Right, let's do that.
Right.
Because that came first.
That came first.
Yeah.
So, that was a much more difficult process because the consumer stuff was easy to figure out what worked because you try it out, and if it works, great, you keep it. If it doesn't, don't try that again. Instructor training, you don't get so many repetitions, right? So I might do... I think when we started doing instructor training for total control, we might have done maybe 20 students in a year for instructors, but we were doing hundreds and hundreds of students on the student side. So, if things didn't go as well in an instructor training, it was a long time again before you got to try it again. And if that didn't work, now you got to rethink about it, and so we learned a lot of lessons the hard way, as anybody does who gets into this business.
What works and what doesn't.
What works and what doesn't.
You had to physically do a lot of it yourself, though. That meant driving around the country.
Yep, absolutely.
The ARC,
yep.
the advanced
Yeah,
riding
and
things.
then I would get instructors trained initially kind of apprenticeship style, but then the only way to really get it out there in a bigger way, I had to come up with a real structured instructor curriculum. Yeah, and we've been working on that since the first one we did was in 2004, and it's been evolving ever since. So the beginner training, basically, there was a huge problem, and there's still a huge problem in most states of motorcycle fatalities going up and up and up every year. And a big part of that is because the standards for becoming an instructor have gotten so low. And a big reason for that is because you can't have a conflict of interest with the final result and expect to have good results. So if you look at where the money for the Motorcycle Safety Foundation comes from, it's primarily given via sponsors, which are all motorcycle manufacturers, who have a fiduciary responsibility to maximize shareholder value by selling as many motorcycles as possible. So naturally, they want training to be as easy as possible to get your license so they can sell more bikes. And it's not just that they're bad companies and they actually have a legal responsibility to do that, or they get in trouble because they're public companies, which is why you want to divorce manufacturers from the training, which we've always done. We don't take money from motorcycle manufacturers for that very reason. So once we increase the standards for becoming an instructor, now the standards were the highest anywhere in our advanced courses because you had to not only be a phenomenal rider, you had to be a phenomenal instructor. So we got to pick the cream of the crop from all the different places where we went. So of course we had wonderful instructors because we were starting with, kind of the A-list of the people that were already out there. So, but to get everybody up there, we had to raise the standards for becoming instructor. As you know, you've been through the process. There's a lot of classes you have to take, shadowing, and then a very extensive instructor training, plus quality assurance that goes on for the rest of your life.
It was one of the hardest 8 days of my life.
Yep.
It was a really tough course.
And those days were after all the other days you put in beforehand, preparing and practicing and shadowing and so forth. Right. And so it turns out if you raise the standards for the instructors to become instructors and you raise the standards for the students to get their license, fatalities go down. Imagine that.
Right.
So, but nobody likes to be told, okay, we're going to make your job harder and you're going to have more disappointed students when you're done. Don't pass the class. That's just not a good selling point that anyone wants to have. But if your goal is reducing fatalities, that's the only option that you have.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for that. Since becoming an instructor, and this applies obviously to the more advanced classes that you still teach and the instructor training that you teach, how often do you teach and typically where?
So if we throw 2020 out the window and 2021 for now, at least.
COVID was an interesting year.
COVID kind of changed everything. So if we go pre-COVID, I would typically do maybe 3 instructor trainings in a year at various parts around the country. I mean, a lot in California, but also in other states. And as I told you recently, in other countries, we've done them in the Philippines, we've been to Okinawa, we've been to Russia, we've been to England, and looking forward to hopefully some classes, some instructor classes as well in Australia and South Africa. Those are on the horizon as well. So I would typically do 3 7-day instructor classes, and then I might teach another.
Just the basic rider course, or would this be the
these would be mostly advanced, but also intermediate occasionally. Okay. And then I would teach probably 20 classes a year, maybe, which is not a lot compared to some of our folks who just teach full time. But running 2 companies full time, it's enough just to get those in. But I love, I will never want to not teach. I love teaching. It's the benefits you get in any industry in teaching or any activity is way more than what money you get or getting better or whatever it is. There's just something. I think there's a way of connecting with the humanity of another human being. In a way that only a teaching environment really allows you to connect at a certain level. So I'll always want to teach some amount, and I also like to always keep my finger on the pulse of what's going on. And as you see changes, as we saw in COVID, we had failure rates went up a few percentage points from students taking the class because we're starting to get people that are not our traditional motorcycle people who never would have thought of getting on a motorcycle before, but they need something to do.
The classroom stuff via Zoom, which I think is a different experience for the students, and certainly for the instructor. I'm not able to have that connection.
Right. Well, it's a different challenge.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I find students are able to be much more relaxed when they're at home on a Zoom call. So that they're not all nervous because everybody, everyone's
the instructor's staring at them
right.
in the classroom and
right.
asking them a question directly.
Yeah, exactly. So there are some advantages too, but I don't think that kind of learning is disappearing anytime soon. But you definitely, there's something that you don't get without the in-person live. But safety first, right. I don't want to see anyone getting sick from COVID or anything else. So, I mean, having said that, the last year and a half, I've not been sick. I've not missed work a single day. Like I've never had an entire time in my life where but with all the masks and precautions everybody's taking, we're all healthier.
Yes.
Just because a lot of the, things that we would normally think of as bad hygiene, but now you're like, who's touched that doorknob, or whatever, just things that you would have never thought of before.
We're disinfecting bikes between classes, wiping down everything.
And since yourself included, we teach so many students, we're so used to shaking hands and like you can't do that anymore like we used to.
No.
But because of that, we're all healthier.
I think so.
Yeah.
Alrighty, so question number 5. What do you like most about being a motorcycle instructor? What floats your boat?
I think there are a few things that, at least for me personally, there are a few things that make you feel as good as when you're able to help somebody else's dreams come true. Right? And so whether your dream is to become a rider, whether it's to become a racer, whether it's to become just really proficient, I'm sure you've seen it too. You have students who end up in tears of happiness. Like they're so overjoyed. And when I think back to my first time riding a bike, I probably had those tears of joy. That first time you get to feel what it's like to accelerate a motorcycle and lean it going through, it's you can't describe it, and it's sort of like the famous definition of pornography. I can't tell you what it is, but I know it when I see it, right? So when you see that look on a student's face, again, no matter what level they're at, when you see that look, and they're just like, that was awesome!
Right.
Yeah. How does that not make you feel just all warm and fuzzy inside? And so in a sense, there's a very selfish part of that too, is I love to feel those good feelings. Yeah. And there's nothing like you making someone else feel that happiness and that joy that makes you feel good. I mean, it just, and so people often ask me, well, I'm thinking about becoming a motorcycle instructor. what do I need to know, or what's the what's important, and I'll say, well, ultimately, you have to derive tremendous pleasure from making other people happy. If you don't get that, then you shouldn't be a motorcycle instructor. Like if you, in a sense, get off at seeing other people learn new skills and feel that joy, you have all the raw material you need to be a motorcycle instructor. If that doesn't do anything if it's just a job, if it's just something to make money, you're not going to be happy teaching riding.
Cool. Thank you for that, Lee.
Yeah.
The flip side of that question, the yin and the yang, the light and the dark, is there anything you dislike about being an instructor?
Oh, sure. There's plenty of things.
Okay, so what do you dislike most about being an instructor?
When it's 110 degrees.
Okay.
When it's 30 degrees. When you're anywhere where it's like 80% humidity or worse. That's, being on your feet all day on hard pavement. I hate all of that stuff. But I love teaching so much that I put up with it because the juice is worth the squeeze, as it were. So, but yeah, I mean, the temperature extremes, the physical demands, sometimes you're just not in the mood to, be wonderful and charming and funny. But you don't have a choice. When the students come in, you put on the happy face. But often what you find is, I'm sure you have too, once you get into it, all that stuff disappears. Nick, one of our assistant program manager here in California, him and I love, in addition to riding dirt bikes and street bikes and road racing stuff, we love mountain biking. And we were downhill mountain biking about a year and a half ago. And it just started pouring rain, freezing cold rain. And then you're cold and you're miserable. And now you get full of mud. But once you're cold and miserable and full of mud, you can have a great time. It's not being cold and muddy that's a problem. It's getting cold and muddy that's the problem. Once you're cold and muddy, it's no problem. Then you can just have fun with the new challenges of sliding around. And so I think training is the same way. Getting cold or hot or whatever and sweaty and nasty or whatever, that's no fun. But once you're there, there's plenty of room to have fun at that point.
Question number 7. What's your favorite exercise to teach in a training program?
So, if I had to pick an exercise that kind of cuts across all the programs, it's probably maximum braking, maximum threshold braking, quick stops, whatever you want to call it, depending on the curriculum. Right. And what's funny and what's interesting about that is that, the sort of scary part of that is that 96% of the time that motorcycles get into crashes, motorcycles are the striking vehicle. That doesn't mean it's the motorcyclist's fault. If a car pulls in front of you, you are still the striking vehicle, even though it was the car's fault that they cut you off or whatever. So I can't emphasize enough the value of braking skills, right? So what's interesting is we teach classes from beginner all the way through racetrack, advanced racetrack training. Yep. And when we first developed our advanced braking systems, it was in the second level of our advanced course, like the highest level course that we teach. And then when we later developed an intermediate course, because states wanted to have a one-day licensing course, so we did like a light version of our advanced course that we had some tests in there. We had braking, maximum threshold braking in there. And the instructors at the time, this would have been 2005, 6, when this first was getting developed, they were like, well, this seems almost the same as our advanced level braking. And I'm like, yeah, as it turns out, intermediate riders need to brake just as importantly as advanced riders need to brake. So then years later, we developed, in 2012, we started developing our beginner course. And the instructors at that time said, well, this seems the same as the intermediate course. And it's like, yeah, as it turns out, new riders, they need to stop quickly just as much as intermediate, and even advanced riders need to. The difference is we just don't push them as hard. So the beginner riders get pushed to a degree that we feel is safe and where they can have basic competence in stopping quickly. Intermediate, we push them a little farther. Advanced, we push them the farthest, But there's only so quick you can stop a motorcycle. At a certain point, you either lock up the front tire or you flip over the handlebars. So if you're on a cruiser, you'll lock up the front tire is the limiting factor. On a sport bike, you'll flip over the handlebars. And so there's really a finite amount, and the best MotoGP racers, they can't stop any faster than a competent street rider. Because those bikes flip over the handlebars just the same as a street bike does.
You're limited by the physics.
You're right. You're limited by the physics of the geometry, not the traction of the tire or the efficiency of the braking system. Yeah. There are some bikes. I remember Harley Davidson came out with the Sportster Sport. I want to say it was in 1996 maybe. And that bike had terrible brakes. But it could stop as fast as any of the sport bikes. It felt like you needed two hands to squeeze the lever.
Right.
It required such a heavy squeeze, but that bike could stop just as short as a sport bike that you could do it with two fingers, or even one finger in some cases. Nowadays, bikes, one finger can flip you over the handlebars, on a modern sport bike. It's amazing.
But being able to teach those students how to use maximum efficiency and get 100% braking efficiency out of what they've got.
Right.
Without locking up the front, without locking up the rear, and stopping that thing as quickly as possible.
So interestingly, you ask about training instructors. So so there's students, there's instructors, then there's instructor trainers. These are the people who train the instructors. Well, one of the challenges for our instructor trainers that we make them do is they have to be able to do error runs for all the techniques.
Yep.
So that means for maximum braking, for quick stops, we make them have to lock up their front tire 3 times in the same run. So as they're coming down, lock up the front tire, let it go, lock it up a second time, let it go, lock it up a third time. Very few instructors are capable of that in any curriculum. And even a lot of our instructors are not capable of that. They can eventually get there if they're willing to put the time in.
Practice,
Right.
yeah.
But, so that's one thing where our instructor trainers really, one of the challenges that they face is they have to be able to, I call it, you've got to be able to be like a rodeo clown, right? So rodeo clowns are incredibly skilled at looking like they have no skills, right?
Yes.
They look like they're just a mess, but they're not a mess. Those are incredibly highly trained athletes, those rodeo clowns. But the idea is they're doing something so dangerous, but they have to make it look silly and funny like it's not dangerous, and they risk their lives every time. So rodeo clowns are incredibly skilled at looking like they have no skills, and that's what our instructor trainers are. Is they're incredibly skilled to be able to make all these mistakes that unskilled students make, and to be able to do them repeatedly and over again.
I remember in my own personal experience with my instructor training down at Camp Pendleton, watching a very talented instructor, Josh Gilbo, demonstrate the incorrect demos and doing exactly what you said. And he rode probably 3 or 4 different bikes, Rebels and GS's and some Korean bikes, the
Hayasungs,
yeah. And locking up the front, locking up the rear, skidding, swerving, showing the incorrect demos.
Right.
And it was incredible to watch with such precision.
Yep.
Without hurting himself.
Right. And that's the other thing is you have to be able to do that on any motorcycle, not just your motorcycle.
As well.
Yeah. All of our trainers can do that.
Yeah. Trainers, they've got to be able to do it. But So that's the next level of my training, to be able to get to the point where I can do that. Yeah. It's going to take a lot of work. Thank you for that. All right. So question number 8: what is the best motorcycle, in your opinion, to train a student on? You're a motorcycle editor. You've ridden a lot of bikes. You know what they are like.
That's like saying what is the best hair color. But okay, I will.
Right. So if I said to you, okay, you're going to own your training range, you've got to go out and buy 15 bikes.
Right.
What would you buy?
So,
to train
so of course, it's going to depend on the type of bike, right? So, I'm a big fan in general of standard bikes.
Okay.
So, the easy way to think about it is cruisers. Your feet are forward, you're leaning back. Sport bikes, you're leaning forward. Feet are back. Standards, you're kind of
straight up and down. Good ergonomics, simple. Right.
So I like standard bikes as training bikes in general, but they're not going to be the best for everyone. They're going to be too tall for some. Right now, I'm really fond of the BMW G310Rs. It's just a good standard ergonomic training bike. I love that bike. It's a little tall for some people. I also really like the new KTM Duke 200s. Very similar to the BMW 300, just less power, so less chance for the student to lose control.
Always good.
Yeah. And then I'll tell you what is not the best training bikes, which is an easier question than what are the best ones. I'm not a big fan of like the Honda Groms or the Kawasaki Z125s, because those bikes are really easy. They're low, which is nice for shorter people, but really short wheelbases. It's very easy to grab too much front brake and flip over the bars on those, as we've seen with students do. So I'm typically not a fan of that, unless you just absolutely must have that for for someone for height. But the cruisers are always going to be better for shorter people or people that ultimately want to own a cruiser. These days I'm kind of on an ABS kick, so I try not to use bikes that don't have ABS if I can help it. Like the Honda Rebel 300s, you can get those with ABS, although they're very hard to find. The Rebel 250s and the Yamaha Star 250s are both totally competent training bikes. They just don't have ABS, which is the only thing I dislike about them. Also fairly durable.
Which forces the student to learn how to brake correctly and not
Correct.
rely on the
Yep.
technology that's built into it.
Correct. But when you're learning, especially something braking that's where things go bad in a hurry,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly. I do advise my students for their first bike, get something with ABS if
Yeah,
you can afford it.
Yeah,
And learn how to use it.
Right,
Get
right.
used to that experience of it kicking in.
Yeah. So anyway, generally those standard kind of bikes are my. But if you're tall, dual sports like Suzuki DR200s are great. The BMW 310 GSs.
Right. YZ. Zero YZ. The Yamaha. Oh no,
The MT-03.
MT-03.
No. You're talking about the taller ones.
yes,
The
200s.
the TW200s. Those are the ones with like the big ATV kind of tires on.
Huge chunky.
Yeah.
models on that.
Those are actually kind of good, do it all. They're not actually that tall, believe it or not. So I actually like those as general training bikes. They're not really like any bike you would normally ride on the street, but they are fun and they're easy to learn on and they're very forgiving. So I do like them for that.
Do you think we'll ever see electric bikes being used as training bikes? In the
We
future?
do, and
Zeros?
we have some already that are in the fleet. The problem with the Zeros is they're very tall and they're very expensive. They're awesome bikes. I did actually just pick up. Actually, if you can turn the camera over here, we have a scooter. This is from a Chinese company called Wufan. This E3 scooter. I just picked this up. In fact, we're going to be dropping it off at one of our training ranges this week. It has 3 power levels, and the lowest power level, you almost can't screw it up.
Right.
And then it gets progressively more, but it never gets very powerful. And would not recommend riding that on normal street where you need to be going over 40 miles an hour because they won't. So, but as a training vehicle, I think that has a lot of potential. Or any of the smaller electric bikes that you're going to start seeing coming out. Even Harley Davidson has a whole bunch of new small electric bikes that are coming out. So.
All right, question number 9. What's the scariest thing that's ever happened to you while instructing a class as an instructor?
So.
Something you witnessed, though.
I was teaching an advanced course about three years ago up in Toronto, Canada, and Toronto, as they say,
Toronto.
and was one of our advanced level 2 courses, and as actually a student was doing downshifting, where we teach them how to blip the throttle and raise the RPM up as you're slowing the bike down. Well, he was so focused on doing the downshifts that he started getting closer and closer to the end of the range, and then panicked and grabbed a handful of front brake full of adrenaline and ended up flipping over the bars. And he ended up, we had to get an ambulance out there. He ended up with a couple of broken bones, some, pretty good scuffs. The bike was totaled. And that happened right in front of me. I mean, the bike missed me by like maybe a foot, this cartwheeling bike. So that was both scary for my own personal safety, but much more so for the student safety. He's since made a full recovery and knows, just don't grab a handful of front brake, or no matter what you're working on, whether this is on the street or whether it's in controlled conditions, you can't have all your focus on that one thing. You always got to keep your eyes out on what else is going on around you, because while you're looking at one thing, something else could come out on the range or out on the street.
Which is why instructor blading is so important.
Yes.
That's something that I was taught.
Exactly.
Very, very important to keep track of where everybody is on the range. Final question. Do you have any advice for anybody thinking of becoming an instructor?
Yeah, I would say I kind of touched on this a little bit earlier. it's got to be, you have to really, being a motorcycle instructor is not about showing people how good you are. People that get into training for that reason never live a good, long, satisfying career. Our goal with teaching students is when they leave there, we don't want them leaving being impressed with what we know as the instructors. We want them leaving being impressed with what they know. And so you've got to really take tremendous satisfaction in them leaving at the end of the day impressed with what they know. And that's really what makes a good instructor. You know, it's not about you showing off, and you know, students may be impressed with doing the demos or whatever, and that's fine. But if that's your goal, you're not going to be very effective.
All right, so thank you so much for being on camera. Thank you for answering the questions. I really appreciate it. I wish you continued success, health, and happiness.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.